version 39 of the competitive Brawl Stars tier list. This is every single brawler ranked from worst to best. And to make this tier list as accurate and competitive as possible, I made absolutely zero of the decisions except for maybe Draco, but only because the pros haven't played him. Seriously, I reached out to some of the best players in the world to gather their feedback for this tier list. So you know this tier list is the cream of the crop. Starting us off, we've got Frank, the worst brawler in the game. And he was almost the worst brawler in the game last update, but nothing changed for him. So he's getting countered even more now, is currently the worst brawler in the game. Next, we got Doug moving from the B tier down into the F tier. Doug got buffed last update and was actually pretty good. But I guess they buffed him too much because then he got an emergency nerf and now he's back to being terrible. And next we have Hank staying in the F tier. Hank recently had a rework and I assume that was going to make him a little bit better, but I guess it hasn't made much of a difference for him, at least not competitively. Next we have D tier brawlers. These are also not competitive. Don't pick them, but they're just not as bad as the F tiers. Kicking us off, we have Penny moving from the C tier down into the D tier. Penny didn't receive any balance changes and that actually hurt her quite a bit. Right now, she just doesn't deal enough damage to compete with most of the top brawlers. Maisie's moved from the B tier down to the D tier. After Maisie's nerf to her supercharge, she's just been getting slowly more and more unplayable with each update. Mandy's moved from the C tier down to the D tier. Mandy didn't get any changes overall, but the meta is getting way more speedy and aggressive, which has made her struggle a little bit more. She's got bumped down a tier. Next is Janet staying in the D tier. Janet's abilities will probably always keep her out of the F tier at least, and even though her super damage did get a huge buff, that really wasn't what was keeping her from being a good brawler. Next, we have the C tier brawlers. These ones aren't also competitive, but you can play them and you can win with them. Just probably not at the pro level. Starting off is Mortis staying in the C tier. And Mortis actually got some slight buffs this update, but he still just does not have the stats to be played against most of the hypercharged brawlers in the game right now. Maybe he'll get a chance when he gets to hypercharge. Crow is moving from the B tier down into the C tier. And he is one of the first brawlers on this list with a hypercharge, which should tell you that his hypercharge is one of the worst in the game. So he is falling quickly behind in the meta, especially because it takes so long for him to charge his hypercharge. Next is Chester, who's moving from the D tier up into the C tier. And Chester's always been a pretty decent counter to tanks and assassins. And since a lot of those are high up in the meta right now, Chester's actually quite a bit better than he has been in the past. Daryl is staying in the C tier. Daryl is honestly a decent brawler, but without a hypercharge, there are almost always better options for tanks or assassins. Bull is moving from the B tier down into the C tier. Bull hasn't had any balance changes for a while now, and while he is one of the hypercharged brawlers in the game, he's getting easier and easier to counter. Bo is moving from the A tier, skipping the B tier and going down into the C tier. Bo is struggling in the meta right now, mostly because his mines are almost useless against so many brawlers that can just dodge them with an ability or run over them because they have high movement speed or because they have a hypercharge. He's just struggling now. B is moving from the B tier down to the C tier. And similar to Mandy, B's another sharpshooter that just hasn't changed in a while, so she's struggling with the changes in the meta. Lou is moving from the B tier down into the C tier. Lou has only been nerfed since his hypercharge was released, so he keeps getting worse and worse with each new hypercharge entering the game. Gus is moved from the B tier down to the C tier. Gus got nerfed hard a few updates, and he just got a buff to his super to make up for it. It didn't quite make up for what his gadget used to be, which is why he's down in the C tier. Grom is moved from the B tier down to the C tier. Grom really isn't that bad, but as of this update, he's probably the last choice to go for when it comes to throwers. Squeak is moved from the B tier down into the C tier. And Squeak is still one of the best brawlers in the game for controlling the map, but any aggro brawler is a big counter to him, so he's really struggling in this meta. Fang is moving from the A tier down into the C tier. And it's kind of surprising to see Fang so much lower on the tier list right now since he is an aggro brawler, but he's just really easy to counter even with his hypercharge now, so he's just not a very good option at the moment. Tara is staying in the C tier. Tara hasn't received any balance changes for a while, but she is slightly better this update just because she plays a little bit better against some of the top brawlers. Edgar is moved from the B tier down into the C tier, and he is just another assassin that is getting easily shut down by certain brawlers at the top of the meta, but he's actually really strong against other certain brawlers. Unfortunately, in a draft format, that doesn't usually work out for him though. Lily is starting in the C tier. This is the first tier list that we have with Lily, and she's probably just a little bit below average. That being said, it was kind of nice to have a brawler release that didn't absolutely break the game. So like props to the developers, but too bad for Lily. She's not the best. Surge is actually moving from the D tier up into the C tier. And Surge is actually doing a lot better in the meta since he is a really good counter to close range brawlers, but he still can be completely useless against brawlers that outrange him. So he's still still below average. Willow is staying in the C tier. She got some decent buffs to both her star powers, which did help her a bit. And even though she doesn't have the most range for a thrower, her super is actually decent to counter some assassins, and closer to the top of that C tier. But the top of the C tier is Miko, moving from the A tier down into the C tier. Honestly, the thing with Miko is that he's just been out long enough for most players to get used to him. And now you can just time your attacks so that his jumps don't dodge so much of your ammo. So he's just not as good as he used to be because of skill. Okay, next we got the B tier. These brawlers are competitive options. They might not be the best everywhere, but on certain maps or modes or to counter certain brawlers, they're good. And kicking us off, we got Bonnie moving from the D tier up into the B tier. She got buffed a while ago, and she's actually a lot better in this current meta since her biggest weakness is getting outranged, and that's just not as important right now. Next is Gale, staying in the B tier. Gale's another really good counter to aggro brawlers, so he's slightly better now, even though he didn't get any balance changes. Chuck is moving from the C tier up into the B tier. Now he received a much needed rework to his super, and we might as well just call it a buff because it bumped him up an entire tier. The fact that you don't have to position himself around walls to be able to place your posts where you want to actually makes him a lot better in a lot of situations. Otis is staying in the B tier. He does a great job shutting down assassins, but his stats are a little too weak to make him like a top tier brawler right now. But B tier is good for him. Next, we have Eve. And Eve didn't receive any changes, and while she is a bit underwhelming, she's actually a great counter against brawlers that can't shoot through her hatchlings, so there are some places for her. Next is Buzz, moving from the A tier down into the B tier. And Buzz was very good when his hypercharge was first released, but he's still pretty easy to deal with if you have brawlers like Charlie or Otis that can easily negate his super. But otherwise, he's pretty good. B tier makes sense for him. Next is Barley, moving from the C tier up into the B tier, and I was kind of surprised to see this. But this all comes down to the fact that he got a nice buff to his attack damage, and while he's still not the best thrower in the game, he is significantly stronger than he was. Next is Dynamite, moving from the A tier down into the B tier. And Dynamite, once again, not the best thrower, and he's slowly getting worse and worse with all of these brawlers getting high movement speeds from their hypercharges. But yeah, he's still somewhat competitive in the right situation. Shelly is moving from the A tier down into the B tier. Shelly is another brawler that's kind of surprising me since she's a good counter to aggressive brawlers, but she's significantly worse this update according to the pros. And it really comes down to the fact that the top brawlers that aren't aggro brawlers can shut her down super easily. Next is Rosa, staying in the B tier. Rosa received a buff to her hypercharge rate, but it doesn't seem to have made too much of a difference for her since she's only slightly better than she was in the previous tier list. Next, we have Ashe moving from the C tier up into the B tier. Ashe actually seems to be doing a little bit better in the current meta versus certain brawlers, even though nothing changed for him stat-wise. Mr. P is moving from the C tier up into the B tier. Now, he got a buff to his super, and since he's always been a good counter to brawlers that can't shoot through his spawners, he's an even better counter to those brawlers now. Up next, we have Draco. We're starting him off in the B tier. At the time of me recording this, Draco has not been released, and basically none of the pros have had a chance to be able to even play him. There are all sorts of speculations on like how good he could be. I've seen everybody ranging from him being completely broken to being like broken in a bad way, like he's so bad. So I'm gonna start him off in the B tier. My hope is honestly that he gets a little bit of a buff before he gets released. We'll have to see though, because overall I'm a little unimpressed with him. Once again, this is the one place where the pros did not place a brawler. This is the one time I get a say in things, so take this with a great grain of salt. Next, we have El Primo, moving from the A tier down into the B tier. He's another close range brawler that is now a little bit worse just because there are brawlers that have risen to the meta that have do a better job of countering him. Next is Sam, moving from the C tier up into the A tier. And Sam is starting to make a little bit of a comeback just because some of his biggest counters actually got nerfed, so he's being played a lot more. Carl is moved from the D tier all the way up into the B tier. Similar to Sam, many of Carl's counters aren't being played as much, so Carl is a little bit more useful now. Griff, my boy, moved from the A tier down into the B tier. Griff didn't receive any balance changes, and he's still actually a pretty good brawler, at least that's what I'm telling myself, if you need to break lots of walls, but there are better options than him, even though it pains me to say it. Lola is staying in the B tier. Lola hasn't received any balance changes, and she hasn't really been affected by how much the meta has changed, so she's kind of in the same place as she was before. Spike is being dethroned, moving from the S tier down into the B tier. It is possible, people. Spike received nerfs to his attack damage and his gadget, and that was enough to knock him down not just one tier, but 2 tiers. The king of consistency is no longer consistent, people. And I'm secretly happy about it because Curveball sucks. I hate Curveball. Brock is staying in the B tier, and he's surprisingly right where he was the last update, even though he did receive a hypercharge. I was surprised too, guys. Leon is moving from the S tier down into the B tier. And Leon didn't actually receive any nerfs this update, but he did the update before, and it's taken a little bit of time for the meta to shift in a way that he's actually just way less effective. And he's basically just an average brawler once again. Ems is staying in the B tier. None of her stats changed. She's being used a little bit more in this meta because of how well she plays against like mid-range brawlers, but she still makes sense in B tier. Pam is also staying in the B tier. No changes for Pam. She's still a good brawler for keeping map control and finding brawlers that are invisible or hidden. Plus, her gadget makes her a good counter to assassins. 8-Bit is staying in the B tier. And 8-Bit is still a tough brawler to counter on certain maps because his range and damage is just so good, but his slow movement speed keeps him from being one of those like top brawlers at the moment. Pearl is moving from the A tier down into the B tier. She's still a decent brawler, but a lot of the top brawlers just aren't as squishy as they used to be, so she's just being played a little bit less by the pros. Larry and Laurie are moving from the S tier down into the B tier. They have been dethroned. They have been nerfed over and over again, and they are finally not broken anymore, and I'm so happy because they were just... oh, it was just terrible. But they're still one of the best throwers, so keep that in mind. Tick is actually moving from the C tier up into the B tier. And this is because Tick received his hypercharge and went from being one of the worst throwers in the game to one of the best. He's still the squishiest brawler in the game though, so he's not a top tier brawler at the moment. BB is moving from the A tier down into the B tier. She's another close range brawler that had a good short run with her new hypercharge, but she's just not as good against the top brawlers. Jackie is staying in the B tier, and she simply has the same problem as BB, but Jackie is just like very slightly better than her. Although sometimes you pick BB, sometimes you pick Jackie. It really kind of depends on the draft and the map. Next we have Colt staying at the top of the B tier. Colt is always a useful brawler if you need lots of damage and lots of wall break, but he's still relatively easy to avoid, so he's not quite A tier at the moment. Okay, next we have the A tier brawlers. These brawlers are pretty much fantastic and competitive a majority of the time. They're just not quite as strong as the S tier brawlers. Kicking us off, we have Sprout staying in the A tier. Sprout is currently the best thrower in the game just because it hasn't really been affected by the meta changes, and it's really good on a lot of the competitive maps right now. Rico is moving from the B tier up into the A tier, and Rico's also very good on the same maps that Sprout is good on, and he's harder to counter than throwers. Up next is Gray staying in the A tier. Gray's not quite as good as he has been just like by himself, but his teleporter is very good with the top brawlers, so he's still A tier. Ruffs is actually moving from the B tier up into the A tier, and a lot of Ruffs' placements on the tier list has to do with how well he works with the top brawlers. Right now, some of his best synergies really are at the top of the list, which is why he's in the A tier. Next is Nani staying in the A tier. Nani received a nerf to her attack damage, but she still has more range than most sharpshooters, and she can deal plenty of damage, and a lot of it can be burst damage as well. Meg is moving from the B tier up into the A tier. There weren't any changes to Meg, but she is a great brawler for countering mid-range brawlers and even speedy brawlers, since her main attack and super are very easy to hit. Kit is moving from the F tier all the way up into the A tier. Kit's gadget got nerfed, but he got major buffs to his attack and super damage, and those buffs have made a world of difference for Kit. Seriously, even just playing Kit is it just feels so much better. Depending on what teammates Kit can latch onto, he's kind of honestly a little bit broken. Colette is staying in the A tier. Colette's hypercharge is still one of the best brawlers in the game, and since nothing's changed about her, she's still a really strong brawler in most situations. RT is moving from the B tier up into the A tier. RT's inline gadget got completely reworked and replaced with out of line, and even though it's not necessarily always the better gadget, it has made him much better in some situations. Next we have Nita moving from the B tier up into the A tier. Nita was already a pretty decent brawler, and now that she has her hypercharge, she is a great brawler despite not having the best range. Stu is moving from the B tier up into the A tier. Stu is a really good brawler all around, but his speed zone gadget increases movement speed to your whole team until it gets destroyed. So like, it's actually really solid. Cordelius is moving from the S tier down into the A tier. I know we just lost the F tier. I'll fix that. Now, Cordelius received a nerf to his attack damage and his supercharge rate. And honestly, I'm a little bit surprised that he's not lower on the list after these nerfs, but he's been kind of a brawler that's a little bit tough to balance because of how good his abilities are. So pros definitely declared he's in the A tier, so we're keeping him there. Buster is moving from the B tier up into the A tier. No changes were made to Buster, but he synergizes a lot with some of the S tier brawlers, more than honestly most of the brawlers in the game right now. Next is Amber moving from the S tier down into the A tier. She's still a very strong brawler, but with no hypercharge or balance changes, there are just a few better choices than her now. Jessie is moving from the S tier down into the A tier. This one's sad for me. I've really been enjoying playing Jessie. Some of the newest hypercharges are just like making existing hypercharges look a little bit weaker. and Jessie's one of those brawlers. A tier is still good for her though. I like playing Jessie. Next is Poco, moving to the B tier up into the A tier. Similar to Ruffs and other support brawlers, Poco is really thriving in this meta, primarily because of how well he teams up with the best brawlers in the game at the moment. Next is Piper, staying in the A tier. Piper got a nerf to her minimum damage that she can deal, but since she's usually not hitting brawlers right next to her, it hasn't made a huge difference for her, and she's still one of the best sharpshooters in the game. Okay, next we have the S tier brawlers. These are the best of the best, usually excellent in any map or mode with any combo. These are also the brawlers you typically want to ban. Kicking us off, we got Byron, moving from the B tier up into the S tier. Out of all of the support brawlers benefiting from the meta shift, Byron is definitely number one. He's not broken by himself, but if he does not get banned, it's pretty easy to make a very strong comp around him. Next is Max, moving from the B tier up into the S tier. And Max's hypercharge is currently one of the best in the game and has obviously made all the difference for Max. I feel like Max has always been a brawler that the pros are just way better at than the rest of us. So when she gets a little bit of energy and buff, then the pros just run with her. Gene is moving from the A tier up into the S tier. Speaking of Max, Gene also got his hypercharge, and he has been Max's best teammate since the day that Max was released. We've seen the Max Gene duo at the top of the meta before, and it is back again with the release of both of their hypercharges. Next is Charlie, staying in the S tier. And I don't think Supercell can nerf her enough, right? She's been nerfed over and over and over again, and she's still one of the best brawlers in the game. No matter how many times they nerf her, her cocoon still just completely shuts down any assassin, and any brawler that gets hit by it is basically dead in a competitive 3v3 match. Next, we have the top 5 brawlers, and while one of them is clearly number one, the other 4 brawlers really are like, it's a really close call. Any one of them could be number 2 or 3. Next is Belle, moving from the A tier up into the S tier. Belle has some of the most range in the game, and her hypercharge makes her one of the toughest brawlers in the game to counter. Next, we have Sandy, moving from the A tier up into the 3rd best slot in the S tier. Sandy just got his hypercharge, and it is easily the best hypercharge in the game right now. Max's hypercharge and Sandy's hypercharge have completely changed the meta all by themselves. Taking number 2 though is Angelo, staying in the S tier. Angelo got his poison damage nerfed super hard, but it clearly wasn't a big enough nerf at all because he's still one-shotting tons of brawlers. He's still broken. But the best of the best has got to be Melody, keeping her place as number 1 brawler in the game. Melody also received some nerfs to her gadget and star power, but just like Angelo, it wasn't nearly enough to make her not totally broken. She is still unanimously the best brawler in the game right now. And that is every single brawler in the game ranked from worst to best. Make sure you grab that screenshot, but don't crop my face out. Once again, a massive shout out to all the pros who helped me, and also a big thank you to Moxie Moron on Twitch, who actually took all the pros' feedback and sorted it out into this awesome tier list. He even wrote the script and recorded the gameplay. Link in the description below to check Moxie Moron out on Twitch. Thanks a ton for watching. Let me know in the comment section whether you guys agree or disagree with this tier list, and let me know why as well. And I'd really appreciate you guys using code Kairos in the Brawl Stars shop. Kairos, code Kairos in the Brawl Stars shop. Get to the best tier lists ever made.